Hey guys, Adam here with AmericanMuscle.com, and today we're taking a closer look at and installing the SR Performance rear shock available for all 2005 to 2014 Mustangs. You should be checking this out if you're in need of a replacement at the rear end for your factory shocks, because we all know after a while they start to get worn out and blow out. If that's your case or you're really unsure, your rear shocks will start to tell you that they're in need of replacement if you're getting excessive squatting upon launches or excessive squatting upon taking off from a red light. You'll also know it's starting to go if you're having a really uncomfortable ride at the rear end on some of that rougher terrain or even on smooth pavement. It might be a good time to swap them out. Now, if you're looking for a replacement, why not go with an upgrade, right? We all want a little bit more performance savvy products. We all want a little bit better handling, and the SR Performance shock here does all that, but on a nice tight budget. This one here comes in only around 50 bucks, and I will say they are sold individually, so if you're looking to replace the whole rear end, it's gonna be 100 bucks total. You wanna pick them up separately. Now, these replacing your factory shocks is definitely gonna be that upgrade in the stiffness and sporty department. You're gonna get better cornering abilities, you're also gonna get slightly better handling. It's just all around gonna be a nice, comfortable ride for a daily driver, but still gonna give a little bit more of a sporty performance feel to them. This has a twin tube gas pressurized design. It's finished in a nice gloss black finish as opposed to your factory matte black. We'll take a closer look at them side by side later on, although appearance wise there isn't too much of a difference aside from the gloss black and the SR Performance sticker. I will say attached to that is going to be your poly bushing on the bottom. You're also going to get two separate bushings, two separate washers, and a nylon lock nut for the top. Of course, a bushing and washer will be under the vehicle, and a bushing and washer as well as the nut will be in the trunk. Now, this guy here does come with a dust shield. You don't have to worry about taking off your old one and swapping it over. Everything's good to go right out of the box. You'll just be reusing your factory bottom shock bolt. Now, as far as this process, you are gonna have to lower your rear sway bar. It's very, very simple. Two bolts are gonna be holding on the top sway bar end links. We're gonna unbolt those, pull it down, and it'll give you access to that bottom shock bolt. We'll start things off in the trunk, and I'm gonna walk you through every single step of the process here. I'm giving it 1 out of 3 wrenches on our difficulty meter. Anybody can tackle it in the driveway at home. No real modifications necessary. It's a simple bolt-on install. Now, if you're looking to do this, you wanna have simple hand tools on deck. You are gonna need a torque wrench to make sure you're torquing down those bolts properly. It also might be helpful to have a breaker bar on deck because they can be pretty tight. I'm gonna walk you through the process. What do you say we get started? We got our 2014 on the lift. Let's get to it. Tools used in this install include an impact gun, 13mm deep socket, 15mm short and deep socket, 18mm deep socket, dead blow hammer, panel removal tool, torque wrench, 15mm ratcheting wrench, a regular 15 wrench works as well, or a ratchet and a 15 socket, and a breaker bar. All right, first step here, guys, you gotta pop open your trunk because we do have to disconnect the shock from the inside of the trunk. So once you pop that open, we have to remove this entire trim panel back by your trunk latch. Top left and top right, there's these little twist clips. What you're basically gonna do is just finger twist that guy off and it comes straight back. Now do the same thing on the other side. Now there's 2 pushpin clips right underneath of that in this little indent. There's one here and there's one on the other side. Grab a panel tool and pull it off. All right, so on our left side, I got my panel removal tool. This isn't required, but I think it makes life a little easier. Just pry up underneath and pull back. All right, so we got that a little bit disconnected here. Pull straight back. Same thing on the other side. All right, now on our carpet, there's a couple of those pushpin clips here, one on this side, one on that side. We don't have one on our left side, so just grab them both off using that panel tool again, and then we can lift this trim panel off. All right, so at this point, we can remove this entire trim panel on the back here where our trunk latch is, grab from both sides or from the center, pull up, and remove it from the vehicle. Now keep in mind, guys, on the back of this, you may have a little trunk light. If you do, you're gonna wanna pinch and disconnect that harness. All right, so now the top of our shock is all the way in the back behind this liner, so we have to pull that back. We don't necessarily have to remove it, we just need to pull it back enough to expose the top shock nut. There's one more push pin clip here, this little Christmas tree clip, and then on top of that, there's a bolt we have to remove, and then we can peel it back. So grab that panel tool and just pull this push pin off. And if you're doing the shocks on both sides of your Mustang, of course you just want to repeat this on the other side, but just for the video purposes, we're going to be showing you this driver's side. All right, so now we can grab our socket and get this bolt off. Grab a 13 socket and remove this bolt. All right, so I like to put it down here. Once that's taken care of, we can start removing this liner. Pull that guy back. So once you have that out of the way, you're exposing the top of your shock. Now what you're gonna do is grab a 15mm deep socket and remove this nut. The nut and this spacer here are all in one piece, so they'll come off together. So we got that off, and you can see here, it's the spacer, nut, and bushing all in one piece. And here you can see the shock comes through this stud. As we put the car in the air, this will start to disconnect and lower down. And all we have left is the one shock bolt underneath the vehicle. So let's get the car up in the air. All right, so we got our vehicle up in the air, and as you can see, we're of course using a lift. If you're working on the ground, you want to position your hydraulic jack under the rear differential or the pumpkin and jack it up from there. It'll make life a lot easier, and I'll explain why in just a second. Really what we're going to do at this point is unbolt the bottom of our shock. Now the shock bolt is tucked in here, but our sway bar is blocking the path to that bolt. The bolt wouldn't back all the way out because the sway bar is in the way. So because of that, we have to unbolt our sway bar links, which are up here. We'll have to do both sides, this side and our passenger, and from there we can swing our sway bar down out of the way, unbolt our shock, swap it out, and then bolt our sway bar back up. Now it sounds like a lot of extra steps, but they're necessary in order to get that shock bolt out safely. What we're gonna do now is support our rear diff with a pole jack because we're on a lift. Like I said, if you're on the ground, you can just put your hydraulic jack or what you're using right under that differential, and that'll be sufficient. Because we're in the air on a lift, I'm gonna grab a pole jack. All right, so really we're just supporting that. I'm gonna put a little bit more pressure on it. So now that we have that supported, I'm gonna unbolt our sway bar. All right, so I'm gonna use a long 15mm ratcheting wrench. You can use just a simple ratchet and socket if you'd like. We're gonna work this guy off. All right, so once you get that bolt out, the end link here is gonna dislodge. You can do the same thing on the other side. All right, with those two bolts out of the way, the sway bar can swing down and give us room to get this bolt out. All right, so now we can take a 15mm socket and remove this bolt. Now keep in mind guys, since we didn't take our wheel off, this nut here may fall and hit the wheel barrel. We don't really want to scratch our wheel, so put your hand in there if you are keeping your wheel in place, just to make sure that the nut doesn't fall down. All right, so we got the nut. Really just pulling out that bolt and bringing down our shock. So we got our factory shock off of our 14 GT, and in my left hand here is our SR Performance rear shock. I'm gonna take you through some of the similarities and differences here, and obviously this isn't an appearance part, but just to talk about the appearance of the two really quickly. The factory shock is black, has that dust shield on it. It's pretty dull, it's more of a matte black. This is a bit glossier, and I also think it's a bit girthier as well. I know I can hear the YouTube comments already. This guy is a little bit thicker. It's gonna have a little bit more of a sporty suspension feel, a little bit stiffer, if you will. This guy here has that same twin tube gas pressurized design. It's gonna fit exactly the same, and as you can see, it's already got pretty much the same exact bushing on the bottom. The bushing, I think, does have a little bit of a higher quality, the polyurethane bushing there with the SR Performance one. It won't wear out as quickly as your factory stuff would. Now, what I wanna talk about is the top here. I'm gonna put the factory guide down. Looking at our new SR Performance shock, you have a little bit of a different system up here. What we do have is a nylon lock nut on the top, a flat washer or spacer here. Spacer's curved at the top, flat on the bottom. We'll take a look at the details of why that matters in just a little bit. We've also got two individual bushings and then another spacer on the bottom. What you want to basically do is take off the bushing, spacer, and nut that I just took off and just remain with this. All right, so there's a spacer on the bottom, flat side facing up, and then the bushing here with that notch facing up. So at this point, we're ready to install our shock, basically doing everything in the reverse order. We're gonna use the factory bolts here at the bottom, but keep in mind you have all that new hardware on the top. All right, when it comes time to install your shock, you wanna make sure you're putting the stud through the hole in the vehicle, back up into the trunk, and then line up the bottom. All right, so we're just feeding that guy into place and then lining up this bottom portion. For the bottom, I'm gonna put this factory bolt right back through, go in the same direction. And then from there, take that nut, feed it through, and again, I know it's tough to see, we still have our wheel on, but I'm just gonna thread this guy in by hand, a couple of threads. We're gonna grab our 15 socket and tighten that down. All right, so at this point, you wanna grab a torque wrench and torque down that bolt to about 85 foot-pounds. Perfect. What we're gonna do now is swing our sway bar up into place. All right, so getting our sway bar up into place, again, you wanna make sure both sides are being aligned properly. This side wasn't going up far enough, so what we're doing is using a pole jack and we just push it up to align the holes. Grab your factory bolt and put that guy through. Of course, grab the nut, the factory nut. You're gonna thread this guy in. I'm gonna thread it all the way in by hand, and then we're gonna finish it off with our ratcheting wrench. Once you have that nice and snug, repeat for the other side, and then we'll torque them both down. All right, now again, this guy's just gonna be 85 foot-pounds, so I got my torque wrench here, just torque it down. All right, so we're pretty much done underneath the car. Let's get our pole jack out of the way, or again, if you're on the ground, get your hydraulic jack out of the way to put our car back on the ground, tighten it up from in the trunk. All right, now that we're in the trunk, you see the new stud coming through at the top of our shock. We're gonna put our bushing on, the new bushing in the kit. We're gonna put our flat washer on, and then finally, the 18mm nylon lock nut. Grab your deep 18 socket and tighten that down. All right, now we can grab our 15 bolt, put it through up the top, grab our 15mm socket and tighten it down. All right, so now it's our back panel trim by our trunk latch. Now, if you remember, ours had this light. We're gonna plug that guy back in. And then you wanna make sure these two bottom feet of that trim have to go underneath of this floorboard. Just gonna lightly pick up on that guy, slide her under. There was one push pin clip here, so I'm gonna put that guy back in. And that's gonna retain that. Now we can work on the trim panel here. We have a Christmas tree clip at the bottom on both sides. And then finally, these little plastic retainer clips at the top. All right, now these thread on, so I'm just gonna pop it onto the stud and then give it a twist to tighten her down. Same thing on the other side. All right, guys, when that last thing is in place, you're good to go. Well, guys, that's gonna wrap up my review and install for the SR Performance rear shock, available for all 05 to 14 Mustangs. You can pick up your SR Performance shock exclusively right here at AmericanMuscle.com.